Why didn't you come when we cried last night? That was the question 3-year-old Madeleine McCann asked her mother over breakfast on May 3, 2007. Kate McCann froze. She and her husband hadn't heard the children cry during the night. What was Madeleine talking about? Had someone been in their apartment while they slept? Had someone tried to take their daughter before? Kate asked Madeleine to explain, but the little girl moved on to something else, the way young children do. 14 hours later, Madeleine would be gone, taken from her bed in a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, while her parents dined 55 meters away. And that breakfast question, why didn't you come when we cried, would haunt Kate McCann for the rest of her life. Because someone had been watching their apartment. Someone had been planning. And on the night of May 3, 2007, that someone took Madeleine. This is the story of the most heavily reported missing person case in modern history. A case that has captivated the world for 18 years. And Madeleine McCann has never been found. April 28, 2007. The McCann family arrived in Praia da Luz, a small village on Portugal's Algarve coast with a population of about 1,000 people. Known as Little Britain, because of the concentration of British homeowners and holidaymakers, Praia da Luz was considered safe. The kind of place where families relaxed, where children played outside, where parents felt comfortable. Kate and Gerry McCann had booked their 7-night spring break through Mark Warner Ltd., a British holiday company. They had been assigned apartment 5A on Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, a 2-bedroom ground-floor unit in Waterside Village, part of the Ocean Club Resort. The family consisted of Kate, 39, and Gerry, also 39, along with their 3 children. Madeleine Beth McCann had been born on May 12, 2003. She was 3 years old and would turn 4 in just 9 days. Her twin siblings, a boy and a girl, were 2 years old. Both Kate and Gerry were physicians. Gerry was a consultant cardiologist at Glenfield Hospital in Leicester, England. Kate had worked in obstetrics, anesthetics, and general practice before focusing on being a mother. They were educated, professional, devoted parents who had struggled for years to have children before Madeleine was born, followed by the twins 2 years later. This holiday was meant to be a family vacation, a week of rest and relaxation before returning to their demanding careers and busy lives in Rothley, Leicestershire. The McCanns had traveled to Portugal with 7 friends and their children, 9 adults, and 8 children in total. The group would dine together most evenings at 8:30 p.m. in the resort's tapas restaurant. Because of this routine, the media would later dub the friends the Tapas 7. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. This is the most heavily reported missing person case in modern history, a case that remains unsolved 18 years later and continues to captivate the world. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. Apartment 5A was strategically located but also dangerously accessible. It sat on the corner of 2 streets. The front door faced Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva. At the back of the apartment were sliding glass patio doors that overlooked the Ocean Club's swimming pool, tennis courts, and the tapas restaurant where the group would dine each evening. The apartment had 2 bedrooms. The McCanns slept in the master bedroom. The children slept in a second bedroom located next to the front door. Inside that children's bedroom, Madeleine slept in a single bed position next to the door, on the opposite side of the room from the window. The 2-year-old twins were in travel cots placed in the middle of the room. The bedroom had 1 waist-high window with curtains and a metal exterior shutter that could be raised or lowered using a cord on the inside. The McCanns kept both the curtains and the shutter closed throughout the holiday. The window overlooked a narrow walkway and a small residence car park, separated from the public street by a low wall. This layout would later become crucial to understanding how someone could have entered the apartment, taken Madeleine, and escaped without being seen from the tapas restaurant. Because while the top of the building was visible from the restaurant, the doors were not. And the apartment was accessible from 2 different sides, both the front and the back, making it easy for someone to approach without being noticed. The days of the holiday passed pleasantly. The children attended the resort's kids club during the day, where they played games and did activities with other children. The families ate lunch together, swam in the pool, and enjoyed the warm Portuguese weather. Each evening, the 9 adults gathered at the tapas restaurant at 8:30 while their children slept in the various apartments. The routine felt safe. The apartments were close. The adults could see the tops of the buildings from where they sat. They took turns checking on the children every 30 minutes or so. Everything seemed fine, but someone was watching. On Thursday, May 3rd, 2007, the second to last day of the holiday, the McCann family woke up and prepared for another day at the resort. And that's when Madeleine asked the question that would haunt her mother forever. Over breakfast, the 3-year-old looked at Kate and said, "Why didn't you come when we cried last night?" Kate was confused. She and Gerry hadn't heard any crying during the night. The children had seemed fine when they checked on them before bed. Kate asked Madeleine what she meant, but Madeleine didn't elaborate. She simply moved on to talking about something else, the way young children do when something briefly catches their attention and then disappears. But Kate couldn't stop thinking about it. Had someone been in the apartment during the night? Had someone entered the children's bedroom while Kate and Gerry slept? Had someone tried to take Madeleine before and been scared off when the children cried out? Or was Madeleine just confused? Maybe she had had a bad dream. Maybe she was talking about a different night. Kate didn't know. She made a mental note of it, but didn't panic. There was no obvious sign that anything was wrong. That morning, Kate also noticed a large brown stain on Madeleine's pink pajama top. She didn't know what had caused it, but she filed it away in her mind. Looking back years later, Kate would wonder if these details, the question about crying, the stain on the pajamas, had been warning signs. Clues that something was wrong. Evidence that someone had been watching the apartment, planning, waiting for the right moment. But in the moment, on that sunny Thursday morning in Portugal, Kate had no reason to suspect anything sinister. The family spent the day following their usual routine. The children played in the kids' club. The family had lunch at the apartment. They went to the pool in the afternoon. At 2:29 p.m., Kate took a photograph. The image shows Madeleine sitting by the pool, next to her father Gerry and her 2-year-old sister. Madeleine is wearing a pink sun hat. She's smiling at the camera. Her distinctive right eye is clearly visible in the photo, a rare feature that would later appear in every missing person poster and news report. Madeleine had a dark strip on the iris of her right eye, a unique mark that made her impossible to forget. The photo shows a happy, healthy, loved child enjoying a family vacation. It would be the last photograph ever taken of Madeleine McCann. After the pool, the children returned to the kids' club for more activities. At 6 p.m., Kate took the children back to apartment 5, and while Gerry stayed behind for a tennis lesson. Kate bathed the children and got them ready for bed. At around 7 p.m., Kate and Gerry put all 3 children to bed. Madeleine was dressed in short-sleeved pink and white marks and Spencer Eeyore pajamas. She was tucked into her single bed next to the bedroom door, surrounded by her comfort blanket and a soft toy she loved called Cuddle Cat. The twins were placed in their travel cots in the middle of the room. Kate kissed Madeleine goodnight, turned off the bedroom light, and pulled the door nearly closed, leaving it slightly ajar the way Madeleine liked it. The bedroom window's curtains were drawn. The metal exterior shutter was down, controlled by the cord on the inside of the window. Everything was secure. Everything was as it should be. The McCanns checked on the children one more time around 8 p.m. All 3 were sound asleep. At 8:30 p.m., Kate and Gerry left apartment 5A through the unlocked patio doors at the back. They couldn't lock the patio doors from the outside. They could only be locked from the inside. So the couple left them closed but unlocked, planning to re-enter through those doors each time they checked on the children. They walked from the apartment, through a small gate at the bottom of the steps leading from their patio, and along the public street toward the Ocean Club's main entrance. From there, they walked through the resort to the Tapas restaurant on the other side of the pool. The restaurant was about 55 meters from apartment 5A as the crow flies. But the walking distance was greater, about 82 meters, because of the route they had to take. More importantly, while they could see the top of their apartment building from the restaurant, they could not see the doors. They could not see if someone approached the apartment. They could not see if someone entered through the front or the back. The McCanns joined their 7 friends at a table that had been reserved for them. The table overlooked the pool and, beyond it, the apartment buildings where their children slept. The resort staff had left a note in a message book at the pool reception area, asking that this same table be reserved for the group at 8:30 p.m. every evening for the rest of their holiday. The note mentioned that the group's children were asleep in the apartments. Kate would later wonder if the abductor had seen this note, if it had told him exactly where to find children sleeping alone, if it had given him a schedule, a routine, a pattern to exploit. But on that Thursday evening, as Kate and Gerry sat down to dinner with their friends, everything seemed normal. They ordered food. They drank wine. They talked and laughed. And they planned to check on the children every 30 minutes, the way they had every other night. Gerry volunteered to do the first check. At approximately 9:05 p.m., he left the table, walked back through the resort, along the street, and entered apartment 5A through the unlocked patio doors. He walked through the living room and to the children's bedroom. The door, which he had left slightly ajar, was now open much wider, almost completely open. Gerry found this odd. He didn't remember leaving it that wide open, but he assumed the breeze from the patio doors had pushed it. He looked into the room. All three children were asleep. Madeleine was in her bed, the twins in their cots. Everything seemed fine. Gerry gently pulled the bedroom door back to its nearly closed position and returned to the restaurant. He told Kate everything was fine. The children were asleep. Neither of them had any idea that this would be the last time Gerry would ever see his daughter, because at that very moment, someone was watching apartment 5A. Someone who had been planning this for days, maybe weeks. Someone who knew the family's routine, who knew the children were alone, who knew the parents were 55 meters away, unable to see the apartment doors, and someone who was about to make their move. At 9:15 p.m. on May 3, 2007, just 10 minutes after Gerry McCann had checked on the children and found them sleeping peacefully, Jane Tanner left the Tapas restaurant to check on her own daughter. Jane was one of the Tapas 7, a close friend of the McCanns who was staying in apartment 5D with her partner Russell O'Brien and their children. As Jane walked along Rua Dr. Francisco Johnny Martins toward the apartments, she passed Gerry on his way back to the restaurant. Gerry had stopped to chat with a British holidaymaker named Jeremy Wilkins, whom he had met during his tennis lessons. The two men were standing on the narrow street, talking casually. Jane walked right past them, so close she could have touched them, and continued toward the apartments. But neither Gerry nor Jeremy recalled seeing Jane walk by. This detail would later puzzle Portuguese police. The street was narrow. How could two men standing there talking have failed to notice a woman walking past them? The police would eventually accuse Jane of lying about the sighting she was about to report. They would suggest she had invented the entire thing. But Jane insisted it happened exactly as she described. Because as she walked past Gerry and Jeremy, just ahead of her, she saw something that would become one of the most discussed aspects of the entire case. A man carrying a child. The man was walking across the junction of Rua Dr. Francisco Johnny Martins and Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, not far from the front entrance of apartment 5A. He was heading east, away from the Ocean Club, carrying a young child in his arms. Jane noticed the child immediately. The little girl appeared to be asleep, wearing light-colored pink pajamas with a floral pattern and cuffs on the legs. Pajamas very similar to the ones Madeleine McCann was wearing. The man was white, with dark hair, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall. Jane described him as having a Southern European or Mediterranean appearance, aged 35 to 40 years old. He was wearing gold or beige trousers and a dark jacket. He did not look like a tourist, Jane later told police. He looked purposeful, like he knew where he was going. Jane continued to her apartment, checked on her daughter, and returned to the restaurant. She didn't immediately mention what she had seen. She had no reason to think it was significant. Not yet. At around 9:30 p.m., Matthew Oldfield, another member of the Tapas 7, staying in apartment 5B next door to the McCanns, offered to check on the McCann children when he went to check on his own. Kate had been planning to do the 9:30 check herself, but Matthew's offer seemed helpful. His apartment was right next door. It would only take a moment. Matthew entered apartment 5A through the unlocked patio doors at the back. He walked through the living room toward the children's bedroom. The door was wide open. Matthew found this slightly odd, but not alarming. He stood in the doorway and listened. No sounds. No crying. No movement. He could see the twins in their cots in the middle of the room. But he didn't walk far enough into the room to see Madeleine's bed, which was positioned next to the door on the opposite side from the window. Matthew assumed all three children were asleep. He left apartment 5A and returned to the restaurant, where he told Kate and Gerry that everything seemed fine. Later, Portuguese police would fixate on this detail. Why had Matthew volunteered to check on the McCann children? Why had he been so helpful? The police suspected that Matthew had been involved in Madeleine's disappearance, that he had volunteered to do the check specifically so he could hand Madeleine through the bedroom window to an accomplice waiting outside. It was a theory based on nothing but suspicion and the coincidence of Matthew having offered to help. But at 9:30 p.m., as Matthew returned to the restaurant and told the McCanns their children were fine, no one suspected anything was wrong. Kate relaxed. The children were asleep. Everything was fine. She ordered another glass of wine and continued talking with her friends. 30 minutes later, At 10 p.m., Kate stood up from the table. It was her turn to check on the children. She left the restaurant, walked through the resort, along the street, and approached apartment 5A from the back, entering through the unlocked patio doors. The apartment was quiet. Kate walked through the living room toward the children's bedroom. The door was wide open, wider than it should have been, wider than Gerry or Matthew had described. Kate felt a sudden rush of unease. She approached the bedroom and tried to close the door slightly, the way it usually was. But as she pushed it, the door slammed shut as though caught by a strong draft. That's when Kate noticed. The bedroom window was open. The curtains were pushed back, and the metal exterior shutter, which had been closed and locked from the inside when they put the children to bed, was now raised all the way up. Kate's heart stopped. She rushed to Madeleine's bed. Empty. The pink Eeyore pajamas were gone. Madeleine's comfort blanket was still there. Cuddle Cat was still on the bed. But Madeleine was gone. Kate checked behind the bed, under the bed, in the wardrobes. She ran to the bathroom. She checked every room in the apartment. Madeleine was not there. Kate ran back to the children's bedroom and checked on the twins. They were still asleep in their cots, completely undisturbed. But Madeleine was gone. Kate ran out of the apartment, back toward the tapas restaurant. She was screaming. Madeleine's gone. Someone's taken her. The words echoed through the resort. Gerry jumped up from the table and ran toward the apartment. The other members of the Tapas 7 followed. When Gerry reached apartment 5A, he went straight to the children's bedroom. He saw the open window, the raised shutter, the empty bed. He ran to the window and looked outside, hoping to see someone carrying Madeleine, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever had taken her. But there was no one. Gerry later told police that he tried to lower the shutter from inside the bedroom, then went outside to see if it could be raised from the exterior. He discovered that it could be, though Portuguese police would later dispute this, claiming the shutter could not be raised from outside without forcing it, and there was no sign of forced entry. This discrepancy would become another point of suspicion against the McCanns. At approximately 10:10 p.m., Matthew Oldfield ran to the Ocean Club's reception desk and asked them to call the police. At 10:30 p.m., the resort activated its missing child search protocol. Within minutes, 60 staff members and guests were searching the resort and surrounding areas. They searched apartments. They searched the pool area. They searched the beach. They searched the streets of Praia da Luz. They called Madeleine's name over and over. Madeleine. Madeleine. One searcher later told Channel 4's dispatches that from one end of Praia da Luz to the other, you could hear people calling for Madeleine. But there was no response. The little girl had vanished. At this point, most searchers assumed Madeleine had wandered off, that she had woken up, perhaps looking for her parents, and had somehow left the apartment on her own. But Kate knew better. The bedroom window had been closed when they put Madeleine to bed. The shutter had been down. Someone had opened that window from the inside. Someone had raised that shutter from the inside. Someone had been in the apartment. And someone had taken Madeleine. At 11:10 p.m., more than an hour after Kate had discovered Madeleine missing, 2 officers from the Guarda Nacional Republicana, Portugal's gendarmerie, arrived at the Ocean Club from the nearby town of Lagos, 5 miles away. They briefly searched the area and spoke to Kate and Gerry. Then, at midnight, they alerted the Policia Judiciaria, Portugal's criminal investigation police, in Portimão. According to Kate's later account, the PJ arrived just after 1 a.m. on May 4th. According to the PJ's account, they arrived within 10 minutes of being alerted. Either way, by the time criminal investigators arrived on the scene, crucial hours had already been lost. At 2 a.m., 2 patrol dogs were brought to the resort to help search. At 8 a.m., 4 search and rescue dogs arrived. But it was already too late. Because while the search was underway, another sighting was being made, one that would later become the focus of Scotland Yard's investigation. At around 10 p.m., right around the time Kate was discovering Madeleine missing, an Irish family named Smith was walking through Praia da Luz. Martin Smith, his wife Mary, and their family were returning to their holiday apartment when they saw a man carrying a young child. The man was walking along Rua da Escola Primaria, about 500 yards from apartment 5A, heading away from the Ocean Club and toward Rua 25 de Abril and the beach. He was carrying a girl who appeared to be 3 to 4 years old. She had blonde hair and pale skin. She was wearing light-colored pajamas. She was barefoot. The child appeared to be asleep, her arms hanging limply by her sides. The man was in his mid-30s, approximately 5 feet 7 to 5 feet 9 inches tall, slim to normal build, with short brown hair. He was wearing cream or beige trousers. Like Jane Tanner, Martin Smith noted that the man did not look like a tourist. And more significantly, the man appeared uncomfortable carrying the child, as though he was not used to holding her, as though she was not his own daughter. The Smith family continued to their apartment. They heard about Madeleine's disappearance the next day, but they didn't immediately report what they had seen to police. It wasn't until May 26th, more than 3 weeks later, that Martin Smith contacted Portuguese police to describe the man he had seen carrying a child that night. By then, the crucial early hours of the investigation had long passed. And by then, Portuguese police had already made catastrophic mistakes that would haunt the case for years to come. The crime scene had not been secured. More than 20 people, police officers, resort staff, family members, searchers, entered apartment 5A before it was sealed off. Fingerprints were contaminated. Evidence was trampled. The integrity of the scene was destroyed. An officer placed police tape across the doorway of the children's bedroom at around 3 a.m., then left without securing the rest of the apartment. A crowd gathered outside the front door of apartment 5A, including directly beneath the children's bedroom window, the very window through which the abductor may have entered or exited. People stood there, walked there, touched the wall. Any footprints, any DNA, any trace evidence that might have been left by the abductor was destroyed. One officer was photographed dusting the exterior of the bedroom window shutter for fingerprints, without wearing gloves or any protective equipment. The apartment itself was left empty for an entire month after the disappearance, then was rented out to tourists before finally being sealed off again in August for more forensic testing. Portuguese police did not immediately seal the borders or set up roadblocks. According to Kate, roadblocks were not put in place until 10 a.m. the next morning, 12 hours after Madeleine disappeared. By that time, if someone had taken Madeleine by car, they could have been hundreds of miles away. They could have crossed into Spain. They could have been anywhere. Police did not request surveillance footage from the motorways leaving Praia da Luz. They did not request footage of the road between Lagos and Vila Real de Santo Antonio on the Spanish border. Euroscut, the company that monitors those roads, later said police never contacted them. It took Interpol 5 days to issue a global missing person alert. Not everyone staying at the Ocean Club at the time was interviewed. British holidaymakers later contacted their own police to say no one had spoken to them about what they might have seen. The golden hours, the crucial first hours after a child goes missing, when the chances of finding them alive are highest, were wasted. And Madeleine McCann was gone. Somewhere out there in the darkness, a 3-year-old girl who had asked her mother that very morning, "Why didn't you come when we cried?" had been taken by a stranger, and no one knew where she was. By the morning of May 4th, 2007, less than 12 hours after Madeleine McCann's disappearance, the case had already become international news. British media descended on Praia da Luz. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Reporters crowded outside apartment 5A. Cameras captured every movement of Kate and Gerry McCann. The couple's photographs were on the front pages of newspapers across the United Kingdom and around the world. And the McCanns made a decision that would define the case for years to come. They would use the media to find their daughter. Gerry later told Vanity Fair that he had decided to market Madeleine to keep her in the public eye. Within days, a string of public relations consultants arrived in Praia da Luz. First came Alex Woolfall from Bell Pottinger, a British PR firm representing Mark Warner Ltd, the holiday company. He handled media relations for the first 10 days. Then the British government sent in its own press officers. Sherry Dodd, a former Daily Mirror journalist, arrived first. She was followed by Clarence Mitchell, Director of Media Monitoring for the Central Office of Information. When the government withdrew Mitchell, the McCanns hired their own PR consultant, Justine McGuinness. Later, Hanover Communications took over, headed by Charles Lewington, formerly Prime Minister John Major's private secretary. Eventually, Clarence Mitchell resigned from his government position and returned to work for the McCanns full-time, paid first by a benefactor and later by Madeleine's fund. The PR campaign was unprecedented for a missing child case. And it worked, perhaps too well. On May 15, 2007, 12 days after Madeleine's disappearance, the McCanns launched Madeleine's Fund, leaving no stone unturned limited. The fund's website attracted 58 million hits in the first 2 days. Donations poured in from around the world. J.K. Rowling donated a substantial sum. So did Richard Branson, Simon Cowell, and Sir Philip Green. The News of the World newspaper pledged £250,000. Throughout May and June, the The McCann's PR team arranged events to sustain media interest. The couple visited the Portuguese city of Fatima, a major Catholic pilgrimage site. They traveled to Holland, Germany, Spain, and Morocco to raise awareness. On May 30th, accompanied by reporters, they flew to Rome in Sir Philip Green's private jet to meet Pope Benedict XVI. The visit was arranged by Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, the Archbishop of Westminster. In June, balloons were released in 300 cities around the world to mark 1 month since Madeleine's disappearance. Madeleine's face was everywhere. On magazine covers, on television, on billboards, on the front page of People magazine in the United States. British newspapers discovered that putting Madeleine on the front page could sell up to 30,000 extra copies. She appeared on the front page of several British tabloids every single day for almost 6 months. Sky News even added her as one of its menu options. UK News, Madeleine, World News. Between May 2007 and July 2008, the Portuguese tabloid Correio de Manhã published 384 articles about Madeleine. But the intense media attention came at a cost. Portuguese police resented what they saw as a media circus. They felt the McCanns were trying to control the narrative. They felt pressured by the constant scrutiny. And they began to suspect that the McCanns' behavior was not that of innocent parents. 12 days after Madeleine disappeared, on May 15th, Portuguese police named their first official suspect, Robert Murat. Murat was a 34-year-old British-Portuguese property consultant who lived with his mother in a house called Casa Liliana, just 150 yards from apartment 5A. Born in Hammersmith, West London, Murat had spent much of his life in Portugal. He had a daughter in England around Madeleine's age, which he said was why he had wanted to help with the search. In the early days of the investigation, Murat had approached Portuguese police and offered his services as an interpreter. The PJ had briefly used him in that capacity, but a journalist from the Sunday Mirror became suspicious of Murat's behavior and reported him to police. On May 14th, 3 members of the Tapas 7, Fiona Payne, Russell O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield, told police they had seen Murat outside apartment 5A shortly after Madeleine's disappearance. So did an Ocean Club nanny and 2 British holidaymakers. Murat and his mother insisted he had been at home all evening. But the suspicion was enough. Beginning on May 15th, Murat's home was searched. His swimming pool was drained. His cars, computers, phones, and videotapes were examined. Police used ground-penetrating radar to search his garden. 2 of Murat's associates were also questioned. But despite the extensive investigation, there was nothing to link Murat or his friends to Madeleine's disappearance. No physical evidence. No credible witnesses. Nothing. Murat's arguido status, the Portuguese equivalent of being named a formal suspect, would not be lifted until July 21, 2008, when the entire case was archived. In April 2008, Murat received £600,000 in out-of-court libel settlements from British newspapers that had accused him of involvement. His 2 associates received £100,000 each. It was the largest number of separate libel actions brought in the UK by the same person in relation to one issue. But while Murat's name was being cleared in the courts, Portuguese police were developing a very different theory about what had happened to Madeleine McCann. A theory that would focus not on Robert Murat, but on Kate and Gerry McCann themselves. As police reviewed witness statements from the night of the disappearance and the days leading up to it, they began to piece together a disturbing pattern. Several witnesses reported seeing men behaving oddly near apartment 5A in the days before May 3rd. On April 20th, a man described as bedraggled-looking had knocked on the door of a tourist staying near apartment 5A, asking for money for an orphanage in nearby Espiche. The man was pushy and intimidating. Later investigation revealed there were no orphanages in or near Espiche. On April 25th or 26th, a man had been found on the balcony of apartment 5A before the McCanns arrived, after entering via the steps from the street. He had asked for money for an orphanage. He was polite and clean-shaven. On May 3rd itself, the day Madeleine disappeared, there were 4 separate charity collections in the streets around apartment 5A by 2 different men. An ugly, blonde-haired man had been seen on May 2nd across the road from apartment 5A, apparently watching it. He had also been spotted on April 29th near the Ocean Club. On April 30th, a blonde-haired man had been seen leaning against a wall behind the apartments, and was seen again on May 2nd near the Tapas restaurant, looking at apartment 5A. Witnesses described him as Caucasian, mid-30s, with short cropped hair, and ugly with spots. On or before May 3rd, a man had been seen staring at the McCann's apartment block, where a white van was parked. In the late afternoon of May 3rd, a girl on the balcony of the apartment above 5A saw a man leave through the gate below, as though he had come from a ground-floor apartment. What caught her attention was that he looked around before shutting the gate quietly with both hands. At 2:30 p.m. on May 3rd, two blonde-haired men were seen on the balcony of apartment 5C, an empty apartment 2 doors from 5A. Between 4 and 5 p.m., a blonde-haired man was seen near apartment 5A. At 6 p.m., the same or another blonde-haired man was seen in the stairwell of the McCann's block. At 11 p.m., after Madeleine had been reported missing, two blonde-haired men were seen in a nearby street speaking in raised voices. When they realized they had been noticed, they lowered their voices and walked away. Scotland Yard would later believe that these sightings represented reconnaissance for an abduction or burglary. There had been a 4-fold increase in burglaries in the area between January and May 2007. 2 burglaries had occurred in the McCann's apartment block in the 17 days before Madeleine's disappearance. In both cases, burglars had entered through windows. It seemed clear that someone had been watching apartment 5A. Someone had been planning. But Portuguese police were not focusing on these suspicious men. Instead, they were focusing on inconsistencies in the statements given by Kate and Gerry McCann and the Tapas 7. The police had asked the group questions in Portuguese. An interpreter had translated the replies. The statements were then typed up in Portuguese and verbally translated back into English for the witnesses to sign. Not surprisingly, there were inconsistencies. One major discrepancy involved whether the McCanns had entered the apartment through the front door or the patio doors when checking on the children. In his first interview on May 4th, Gerry said they had used the locked front door. In a second interview on May 10th, he said he had entered through the unlocked patio doors. There were also questions about whether the front door had been locked at all. Gerry later told the Sunday Times that they had used the front door earlier in the week, but it was next to the children's bedroom and made noise, so they had started using the quieter patio doors instead. Portuguese police also questioned why Kate had run to the Tapas restaurant when she discovered Madeleine was missing, leaving the twins alone in the apartment, instead of using her mobile phone or shouting from the balcony. Another major issue was the bedroom window shutter. Kate said the shutter and window had been closed when Madeleine was put to bed, but open when she discovered Madeleine was missing. Gerry told police that when he was first alerted to the disappearance, he had lowered the shutter from inside, then gone outside, and discovered it could be raised from the outside. But Portuguese police said the shutter could not be raised from outside without being forced, and there was no sign of forced entry. They also claimed forcing the shutter would have made a lot of noise. These apparent discrepancies fed the growing suspicion among Portuguese investigators that there had been no abduction at all. The PJ began to develop a theory. Madeleine had died in apartment 5A as a result of an accident, perhaps after being sedated to help her sleep. Kate and Gerry, the theory went, had panicked and hidden her body. The regular checks on the children, the Tapas dinner, the open window, all of it, according to this theory, was an elaborate cover-up, and the Tapas 7 had helped them mislead police. The first public hint of this theory came on June 6, 2007, when a German journalist asked Kate and Gerry during a Berlin press conference whether they were involved in Madeleine's disappearance. The McCanns were shocked. The question seemed absurd, offensive, but it was a sign of what was coming. On June 30th, a 3,000-word article appeared in Sol, a Portuguese weekly newspaper, with the headline "The Madeleine Case, a Pact of Silence." The article stated that the McCanns were suspects. It highlighted alleged inconsistencies in their statements. It implied that the Jane Tanner sighting had been invented. The reporters who wrote the article had obtained the mobile phone numbers of the Tapas 7 and other witnesses, proof that someone inside the investigation was leaking information. This article, and others that followed, made several explosive allegations that would follow the McCanns for years. That the McCanns and Tapas 7 were swingers who engaged in partner swapping. That the McCanns had been sedating their children to make them sleep while the adults went out. That the group had formed a pact of silence about what really happened on May 3rd. None of these allegations were based on any evidence, but they spread like wildfire through Portuguese and British media, and later through social media. The tide was turning against the McCanns, and Portuguese police were preparing to make them official suspects in their own daughter's disappearance. On June 28, 2007, Nearly 2 months after Madeleine's disappearance, Kate and Gerry McCann made a suggestion to Portuguese police that would have catastrophic consequences. They suggested that police consult with Danny Krugel, a South African former police officer who claimed to have developed a matter orientation system, a handheld device that he said could locate missing people using DNA and satellites. When scientists later heard about this device, one said it had caused his BS detector to go off the scale. The technology Krugel described simply did not exist. It was scientifically impossible. But Kate and Gerry were desperate. They were willing to try anything to find their daughter. The couple sent Krugel hair and eyelashes collected from Madeleine's belongings at the family home in England. Krugel arrived in Praia da Luz on July 15th and told the McCanns that his equipment had picked up a static signal in an area of beach near the Rocha Negra cliff. Inspector Goncalo Amaral, the officer in charge of the Portuguese investigation, interpreted Kate's support of Krugel very differently than the McCanns intended. By this point, Amaral was convinced that the McCanns were involved in Madeleine's disappearance. He believed Kate was using Krugel and her earlier consideration of using psychics to disclose the location of her daughter's body without incriminating herself. In other words, Amaral thought Kate was trying to lead police to Madeleine's remains while making it look like the discovery had nothing to do with her. With this suspicion in mind, the Policia Judiciaria sent a letter rogatory, an official request for judicial assistance, to British police, asking for help searching for Madeleine's body. In response, Mark Harrison, the National Search Advisor for Britain's National Policing Improvement Agency, arrived in Praia da Luz. Harrison walked the search areas and flew over them by helicopter. In his report dated July 23, 2007, Harrison described Krugel's theories as highly unlikely. He noted that 100 officers had searched up to 15 kilometers around Praia da Luz, but most of the team had no training in proper search procedures. Search dogs had been used, but only after 5 days instead of within the recommended 2-day window. Harrison recommended searching the beach and shoreline, an open area near the village, Robert Morat's property, apartment 5A, the Tapas 7's apartments, and any vehicles hired by the McCanns or their friends. He recommended using ground-penetrating radar, and he recommended bringing in 2 specialized sniffer dogs from South Yorkshire, England. Their names were Eddie and Keela. Eddie was an enhanced victim recovery dog, a cadaver dog, trained to detect the scent of human remains. He would give a bark alert when he detected that scent, even if the remains were buried, burned, or underwater. Keela was a forensic investigation dog trained to detect human blood. She would give a passive alert by placing her nose close to the scent and freezing in position. Both dogs were highly trained. Both had excellent track records. And both were about to transform the McCann investigation. On July 31, 2007, Eddie and Keela arrived in Praia da Luz with their handler, Martin Grime. They were taken to apartment 5A, which had been sealed off for forensic examination. In the living room, both dogs alerted behind the sofa. Eddie, the cadaver dog, gave an alert near the wardrobe in the master bedroom. The dogs were also taken to nearby wasteland and the beach. There were no alerts in those locations, but the alerts inside apartment 5A were significant. Eddie's alert suggested that human remains had been present in the apartment. Keela's alert suggested that human blood had been present. Portuguese police obtained warrants to search the house the McCanns had rented after leaving apartment 5A, a property on Rua das Flores, and to examine the silver Renault Scenic the couple had hired 24 days after Madeleine went missing. On August 2nd, police searched the rental house and grounds. The only alert came from Eddie, the cadaver dog, when he encountered Cuddle Cat, Madeleine's beloved soft toy that had been on her bed the night she disappeared. Kate had been carrying Cuddle Cat with her constantly since the disappearance. Keela, the blood dog, did not alert to Cuddle Cat. Police removed boxes of the McCanns' clothing, the toy, latex gloves, suitcases, a notepad, 2 diaries, including one Kate had started writing after Madeleine disappeared, and a Bible that Kate had borrowed from a friend. A passage the Bible's owner had marked in 2 Samuel about the death of a child was copied into the police file along with a Portuguese translation. When the seized items were taken to another location for further examination, Eddie alerted to one of the boxes of clothes. A source close to the McCanns' lawyers told reporters that if there was indeed a smell of corpses on Kate's clothes, it could have been caused by her contact with dead bodies as a family doctor in her medical practice. On August 6th, Police brought both dogs to an underground car park in Portimao, where 10 vehicles were parked 20 to 30 feet apart. Among them were the McCanns' rented Renault Scenic and Robert Murat's car. Eddie, the cadaver dog, gave an alert outside the McCann's car by the driver's door. The next morning, Keila was brought in. She alerted inside the car's boot, the trunk, in the area behind the rear seats. She also alerted to the map compartment in the driver's door, which contained the car's ignition key and key ring. When the key ring was hidden beneath sand in a fire bucket, Keila alerted again. When the bucket was moved to a different floor of the car park, she alerted once more. The implications were staggering. According to the dog's alerts, human remains and human blood had been in the car, but the McCanns had not rented that car until May 28th, 25 days after Madeleine disappeared. If the dogs were correct, it meant that Madeleine's body had been hidden somewhere for nearly a month, then transported in the rental car to a new location. Almost immediately, Portuguese media began running stories that Madeleine had died inside apartment 5A. Headlines screamed that the McCanns were murderers, that they had killed their daughter, perhaps accidentally, and covered it up. Hair and fiber samples were collected from the areas where the dogs had alerted, both in apartment 5A and in the rental car. The samples were sent to the Forensic Science Service in Birmingham, England, for DNA analysis. They arrived around August 8, 2007. And on that same day, before waiting for the DNA results, Portuguese police called Kate and Gerry to a meeting at police headquarters in Portimao. Guilhermino Encarnação, the regional director of the Polícia Judiciária, and Luís Neves, a coordinator from Lisbon, told the McCanns that the case was now officially a murder inquiry. When Encarnação died of stomach cancer in 2010, the Daily Telegraph identified him as a major source of the leaks against the McCanns. Both Kate and Gerry were interrogated that day. The officers suggested that Kate's memory was faulty, that she was confused about what had happened, that perhaps Madeleine had died in an accident and Kate had panicked. Kate was horrified. Gerry was furious. But worse was coming. On September 3rd, John Lowe from the Forensic Science Service sent an email to Detective Superintendent Stuart Pryor of Leicestershire Police, the liaison between British and Portuguese authorities. Lowe's email described the DNA results from the car boot. The results were far from the smoking gun Portuguese police had hoped for. Lowe explained that the sample was too complex for meaningful interpretation. It contained DNA from at least 3 people, possibly as many as 5. 15 of the 19 components in Madeleine's DNA profile were present in the sample, but there were 37 components total in the sample. Lowe wrote, "We cannot answer the question, is the match genuine, or is it a chance match?" In other words, the DNA evidence was inconclusive. It could not prove that Madeleine's body had been in the car. The sample could have come from Madeleine, or it could have come from her siblings, who shared much of her DNA, or it could have come from multiple people whose DNA happened to overlap with some of Madeleine's components. There was no way to know. But Portuguese police did not share this crucial detail with the media or the public. Instead, on September 5th, just 2 days after receiving Lowe's inconclusive email, Portuguese police made Kate an offer. According to Kate's later account, they told her that if she admitted Madeleine had died in an accident in the apartment and that she had hidden the body, she might serve only 2 years in prison. Gerry would not be charged. He would be free to leave Portugal with the twins. Kate refused. She insisted she had nothing to do with Madeleine's disappearance. She had not harmed her daughter. She had not hidden her body. 2 days later, on September 7th, 2007, both Kate and Gerry McCann were formally made arguidos, official suspects, in their daughter's disappearance. They were advised by their lawyer not to answer questions during their interrogations. Gerry did answer some questions, but Kate declined to respond to 48 of the questions she was asked during an 11-hour interview. Her silence would later be used against her in the court of public opinion. Critics said her refusal to answer questions proved she was guilty. But Kate's lawyer had advised her that anything she said could be misinterpreted or mistranslated and used against her. Meanwhile, Portuguese police were leaking information to the media. Journalists in Portugal were told the DNA evidence was a 100% match. British tabloid headlines screamed, "Corpse in McCann car," and "Clump of Maddie's hair found." In reality, the DNA evidence proved nothing. It was inconclusive, possibly meaningless. But the damage was done. The McCanns were now suspects in their own daughter's murder. And the media frenzy that had once been sympathetic to them had turned vicious. Kate's appearance was scrutinized. She was too thin. too controlled, too attractive, too well-dressed. She didn't cry enough on camera, or she cried too much, or her tears looked fake. Much of the commentary came from other women, who judged her maternal behavior and found it lacking. Portuguese tabloid Correio de Manhã noted that Kate had not shed a single tear in public. In reality, Kate had been advised by abduction experts not to show excessive emotion on camera because the kidnapper might enjoy seeing her distress. But the public didn't know that, and the accusations continued. The McCanns were called swingers. They were accused of sedating their children. They were accused of forming a pact of silence with their friends. Social media, still relatively new in 2007, became a cesspool of conspiracy theories. And through it all, Kate and Gerry maintained their innocence. They had not harmed their daughter. They had not hidden her body. They had been having dinner 55 meters away when someone took Madeleine from her bed. On September 9, 2007, despite their arguido status, the McCanns were allowed to leave Portugal. Their lawyer advised them to return to England immediately. They did, arriving home on September 9 to a media circus even larger than the one in Portugal. And in Portugal, the police investigation continued. Chief Inspector Tavares de Almeida signed a 9-page report concluding that Madeleine had died in apartment 5A as a result of an accident, that the tapas dinner and the regular checks had been part of a cover-up, that the tapas 7 had helped mislead police, and that the McCanns had concealed their daughter's body. But there was one problem with this theory. There was absolutely no evidence to support it. On July 21, 2008, 15 months after Madeleine McCann disappeared, Portugal's Attorney General, Fernando José Pinto Monteiro, made an announcement that would change everything. There was no evidence to link Kate and Gerry McCann or Robert Murat to Madeleine's disappearance. The arguido status for all three was lifted, and the case was officially closed. After more than a year of investigation, after millions of pounds spent, after thousands of pages of witness statements and forensic reports, Portuguese authorities had concluded that they simply did not know what had happened to Madeleine McCann. A 58-page prosecutor's report stated, "No element of proof whatsoever was found which allows us to form any lucid, sensible, serious, and honest conclusion about the circumstances." On August 4, 2008, Portugal's Ministério Público released 17 case files to the media, 11,233 pages on CD-ROM. The files included everything: witness statements, forensic reports, police theories, photographs, and details about the investigation's many failures. The McCanns and their supporters hoped the release would vindicate them, would show the public that there had never been any real evidence against them. But the damage had already been done, and just 3 days after the case closed, a new attack began. On July 24, 2008, Goncalo Amaral, the former head of the investigation who had been removed from the case in October 2007, published a book. The title was Maddie, A Verdade de Mentira, Maddie, The Truth of the Lie. In it, Amaral laid out his theory. Madeleine had died in an accident in apartment 5A, and her parents had faked an abduction to cover it up. The book was published by Guerra and Paz in Portugal. By November 2008, it had sold 180,000 copies. By 2010, it had been translated into 6 languages. A documentary based on the book was broadcast on Portuguese television in April 2009, watched by 2.2 million viewers. The McCanns were devastated. They filed a libel lawsuit against Amaral and his publisher in 2009. The legal battle would continue for years. In 2015, they were awarded over 600,000 euros in damages. But Amaral appealed, and in 2016, the decision was overturned. The case went to Portugal's Supreme Court. In February 2017, the Supreme Court ruled against the McCanns in a 76-page decision. The judges wrote that the McCanns had not, in fact, been cleared by the archiving of the case in 2008. They had simply not been charged due to lack of evidence. It was a devastating blow. The McCanns had spent years fighting Amaral in court, using money from Madeleine's fund to cover legal fees. And they had lost. Amaral's book remained in print. The documentary remained available, and the conspiracy theories continued to spread. But while the McCanns fought legal battles in Portugal, they never stopped searching for their daughter. On May 15, 2007, just 12 days after Madeleine disappeared, Kate and Gerry had established Madeleine's fund, leaving no stone unturned limited. The fund's website had received 58 million hits in its first 3 months. Over 80 million people visited the site in total. Donations poured in from around the world. J.K. Rowling donated a substantial sum. Richard Branson gave £100,000 to the McCann's legal fund. Simon Cowell donated $50,000. Sir Philip Green donated £250,000. The News of the World newspaper pledged £250,000. Appeals by public figures were screened at football matches across the UK. Between May 2007 and March 2008, the fund received £1,846,178. The money was used to hire private investigators. Shortly after the disappearance, an anonymous benefactor paid for Control Risks, a British security company, to assist the McCanns. In September 2007, Brian Kennedy of Everest Windows stepped forward as a major benefactor, offering financial support and joining the fund's board of directors. Kennedy hired Método 3, a Spanish detective agency, for 6 months at £50,000 per month. The agency put 35 investigators on the case across Europe and Morocco, but the relationship ended when the head of Método 3 made several reckless public statements, including telling CBS, "We know the kidnapper. We know who he is and how he has done it." The statement was false. They knew no such thing. In 2009, the McCanns hired David Edgar, a retired British detective inspector, on the recommendation of Manchester's Serious Crime Squad. Edgar released an e-fit in August 2009 of a woman who had allegedly asked 2 British men in Barcelona whether they were there to deliver her new daughter. In 2008, the fund hired Oakley International, a Washington, D.C.-based detective agency, for over £500,000. Oakley sent a 5-man team to Portugal led by Henri Exton, a former British police officer who had worked for MI5. The Oakley team conducted undercover operations within the Ocean Club, among pedophile rings, and in the Roma community. Exton focused on the Smith sighting, the Irish family who had seen a man carrying a child toward the beach at 10 p.m. on the night Madeleine disappeared. The Oakley team produced e-fit images based on the Smith's description. But there was a problem. Martin Smith, the father who had seen the man carrying the child, had later watched BBC coverage of the McCanns returning to England from Portugal. As Gerry McCann exited the aircraft carrying his son, Smith thought he recognized him as the man he had seen in Praia da Luz. He reported his suspicion to Leicestershire police. This was enormously sensitive. If the Smith e-fits, which bore some resemblance to Gerry, were released to the public, they would fuel conspiracy theories that Gerry had been involved in Madeleine's disappearance. Smith later came to accept that he had been mistaken. Witnesses had placed Gerry in the Tapas restaurant at 10 p.m. He could not have been the man carrying a child toward the beach. But the damage was done. The Oakley report, completed in November 2008, could not be released publicly because of its implications. The e-fits were passed to Portuguese police and Leicestershire police, but they were not made public. Not yet. In May 2011, everything changed. British Home Secretary Theresa May announced that Scotland Yard would launch an investigative review of Madeleine's disappearance. The operation was called Operation Grange. It would be led by the Metropolitan Police, with a team of 29 detectives and 8 civilians. The announcement appeared to have been triggered by a campaign in the Sun newspaper, owned by News International. On May 11, 2011, the Sun published an open letter from Kate and Gerry on its front page, asking Prime Minister David Cameron to launch a new inquiry. 20,000 people signed the petition that day. The same day, Home Secretary Theresa May spoke by phone with Rebecca Brooks, News International's chief executive, and Dominic Mohan, editor of The Sun. The next day, May wrote to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner requesting the review. Within 24 hours, Cameron announced Operation Grange. The timing raised questions at the Leveson inquiry into press standards about whether News International had pressured the government into action. But regardless of how it started, Operation Grange represented new hope for the McCanns. Scotland Yard brought fresh eyes to the case. They had no preconceptions, no biases, no history with Portuguese police. They reviewed tens of thousands of documents. They had materials translated. They investigated over 8,000 potential sightings. In July 2013, the review officially became a full criminal investigation. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, the senior investigating officer, made Scotland Yard's position clear. They were treating Madeleine's disappearance as a criminal act by a stranger, most likely a planned abduction or a burglary gone wrong. Redwood believed someone had been conducting reconnaissance on apartment 5A in the days before the disappearance. The witness statements about men collecting for fake charities, the blonde men watching the apartment, the fourfold increase in burglaries in the area, all of it pointed to planning. In October 2013, Scotland Yard made a dramatic move. They released e-fit images of men they wanted to trace, including the e-fits from the Smith sighting that had been withheld since 2008. They also staged a reconstruction on the BBC program Crime Watch, which aired in the UK, Netherlands, and Germany. And they made a crucial announcement. The Jane Tanner sighting, the man she had seen carrying a child at 9:15 p.m., was not related to Madeleine's disappearance. Scotland Yard had identified that man as a British holidaymaker who had been collecting his daughter from the Ocean Club's night crash. They had photographed him wearing the same clothes, in the same location, carrying his daughter the same way. The Tanner sighting, which had dominated the early investigation, was a red herring. The Smith sighting at 10 p.m. was the crucial one. Days after Crime Watch aired, Portugal's Attorney General reopened the Portuguese investigation, citing new evidence. For the first time since 2008, both British and Portuguese police were actively investigating Madeleine's disappearance. Operation Grange continued to pursue leads. In June 2014, officers from Scotland Yard and the Polícia Judiciária, accompanied by archaeologists and sniffer dogs, searched drains and dug up 60,000 square meters of wasteland near Praia da Luz. Nothing was found. They interviewed multiple persons of interest, including former Ocean Club employees and individuals who had been making phone calls near the resort on the night Madeleine disappeared. They investigated Euclides Montero, a former Ocean Club restaurant worker who had been fired for theft. His mobile phone had been used near the resort that night. He had died in a tractor accident in 2009, but police looked into whether he might have been involved in burglaries that escalated into abduction. They investigated connections to a series of sexual assaults on British children in holiday homes in the Algarve between 2004 and 2006. In 4 separate incidents, a man had entered homes where British families were staying and sexually assaulted young girls aged 7 to 10 in their beds. The man spoke English with a foreign accent. His speech was slow, possibly slurred. He had short dark hair, tan skin, and according to 3 victims, a distinctive smell. Scotland Yard believed this man might be connected to Madeleine's disappearance. Portuguese police reportedly believed the intruder was Euclides Montero, but Montero was dead, and no definitive connection was ever proven. Operation Grange was scaled back in October 2015. The team was reduced to 4 officers, but they continued pursuing what they described as significant lines of inquiry. By 2024, Operation Grange had cost £13.2 million. And then, in June 2020, came the most significant development in years. German prosecutors made a stunning announcement. They had a prime suspect in Madeleine McCann's abduction and murder. His name was Christian Brückner. Brückner was a convicted child sex offender and rapist who had been living in the Algarve region of Portugal in 2007. At the time of Madeleine's disappearance, he had been living in a borrowed Volkswagen camper van near Praia da Luz. German prosecutors said they had concrete evidence that Brückner had killed Madeleine, but they would not reveal what that evidence was. Brückner's mobile phone had been tracked to the area near the Ocean Club on the night of May 3, 2007. Cell phone records showed that his phone had been used within 5 minutes of Madeleine's disappearance, and phone records showed a 30-minute call between Brückner's phone and another number on the night of the disappearance. German police appealed to the public for information about both numbers. A woman who had been Brückner's girlfriend at the time came forward with a chilling account. She said that the night before Madeleine disappeared, Brückner had told her, "I have a job to do in Praia da Luz tomorrow. It's a horrible job, but it's something I have to do and it will change my life. You won't be seeing me for a while." Brückner's car, a Jaguar XJR6, was re-registered to a new owner the day after Madeleine disappeared. In 2021, the Mirror reported that German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters had become convinced that Brückner had abducted and murdered Madeleine. But there was a problem. Brückner had not been formally charged. German courts were confused about jurisdiction. They couldn't agree on which court should handle the case based on where Brückner's last German address had been. Years passed. Still no charges. In April 2022, Brückner was given arguido status by Portuguese authorities, meaning he could be extradited for formal questioning. In May 2023, Portuguese, German, and British police conducted a major search near the Array Dam in the Algarve, about 50 kilometers from Praia da Luz. Cell phone data had placed Brückner's phone near the dam shortly after Madeleine's disappearance. German investigators believed it was possible that Brückner had killed Madeleine near the dam and disposed of her body in the water. The search involved heavy machinery, ground-penetrating radar, and specialized teams. Nothing was found. In October 2024, Brückner was tried in Germany for 5 unrelated sexual offenses committed in Portugal between 2000 and 2017. He was acquitted of all charges. In September 2025, Brückner was released from a German prison after serving 7 years for a rape he had committed in Portugal's Algarve region. As part of his release conditions, he was required to wear an electronic monitoring tag and surrender his passport. He moved constantly between motels and homeless shelters across Germany, living on social welfare payments. And as of today, Christian Brückner has still not been charged with any crime related to Madeleine McCann's disappearance. German prosecutors say they believe Madeleine is dead. They say they have evidence, but they have not filed charges. And the McCann family continues to wait. For Kate and Gerry McCann, the past 18 years have been unimaginable. They have faced accusations, conspiracy theories, libel, and hatred from strangers around the world. Social media has been particularly vicious. The hashtag McCann still generates hundreds of tweets per hour, many of them accusing Kate and Gerry of involvement in their daughter's death. In 2013, one man who ran an anti-McCann website received a 3-month suspended sentence after distributing leaflets in the McCann's village with his allegations. In 2014, a Twitter user was found dead after Sky News confronted her about her 400 anti-McCann tweets. The couple has sued multiple newspapers for libel. In 2008, Express newspapers paid £550,000 to Madeleine's fund and published front-page apologies after running false stories about the McCanns. The top is 7 received £375,000 from the Express Group. In 2013, the Sunday Times paid £55,000 after implying the McCanns had withheld the Smith e-fits from police. Kate wrote a book, Madeleine, published in 2011. It was serialized by the Sunday Times and the Sun for a payment to Madeleine's fund of between £500,000 and £1 million. In 2011, Kate and Gerry testified before the Leveson inquiry into British press standards. They described the monstering they had endured, the constant scrutiny, the false allegations, the invasion of their privacy. Lord Justice Leveson called the tabloid coverage complete piffle. Through it all, Kate and Gerry have never given up hope. They have released age-progressed images of Madeleine over the years, showing what she might look like at age 6, at age 9, as a teenager, as a young woman. If Madeleine is alive today, she would be 21 years old. She would have no memory of her parents or her family. She might not even know her real name. But she would still have that distinctive mark on her right eye, the dark strip on the iris that makes her impossible to forget. A mark that, if she is alive, could still identify her. Kate and Gerry continue to live in Rothley, Leicestershire, with Madeleine's twin siblings, who are now 19 years old. They have largely retreated from public life, giving occasional interviews on significant anniversaries, but otherwise trying to live as normally as possible. Madeleine's bedroom has been kept exactly as it was when she disappeared. Her toys are still there. Her clothes are still there, waiting for her to come home. The search continues. Operation Grange remains active, though scaled back significantly. Portuguese police continue their investigation. German prosecutors continue building their case against Christian Brückner. And somewhere in the world, there may be answers. Someone may know what happened to Madeleine McCann on the night of May 3, 2007. Someone may know where she is. Someone may know the truth. If this story moved you, if you believe every missing child deserves to be found, subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on your notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Tomorrow at 7:30 p.m., we're releasing another case that will leave you speechless. This story is only available to subscribers. We pour everything into these investigations. We research for days. We treat every victim with dignity and respect. And we create content for people who truly care about justice. So if you want to be here tomorrow, subscribe now. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. And we'll see you tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. This is Cold Case Records, where every victim's story matters, where every family deserves answers, and where we honor the memory of children like Madeleine McCann, who deserved so much more than what happened to her. If you have any information about Madeleine McCann's disappearance, please contact Operation Grange at the Metropolitan Police in London or the Polícia Judiciária in Portugal. Madeleine disappeared on May 3, 2007, from Praia da Luz, Portugal. She was 3 years old. She had blonde hair and a distinctive dark strip on the iris of her right eye. 18 years later, the question remains, what happened to Madeleine? And until she is found, the search will continue. Thank you for being here for Madeleine's story. We'll see you tomorrow.